many of these programs. And listen, the government has done more than any institution.
And live here on C-SPAN, we take you now to London. Prime Minister Theresa May will be addressing Parliament on the latest Brexit update.
For her local force, which I know will go to help with this absolute priority.
Speaker, the percentage of convictions secured for domestic abuse is the highest since 2010. What more can the department do in order to ensure that we get more prosecutions and thereby more convictions?
Mr. Speaker, I've listened carefully to what my honourable friend has said. I think that the resources and the settlement that has been announced, the additional almost £1 billion for police forces in England and Wales will certainly help, but there is also more that can be done in terms of making sure police have the powers that they need.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last November, Tyne and Wear MPs joined together in Westminster Hall to raise the funding problems of Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Service, and the Minister undertook to meet the Chief Fire Officer. Can the Minister update us on progress in resolving those problems? Thank you.
Well, can I thank the honourable lady in the House for that welcome. Having recently met with the leadership of Tyne, we're excellently led force that is going to be receiving increasing core spending of 1.5% this year. But my undertaking to her, as I did to all fire chiefs today, is I want to work with them to build the evidence base, to put in a credible bid in the next CSR to make sure that our fire service continue to be well resourced and world class.
Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the domestic violence bill really is an outstanding piece of legislation, and I'm pleased to be getting a warm welcome from both sides of the House. I'm hearing anecdotal evidence, however, that the East Midlands Ambulance Service and indeed Nottinghamshire Police aren't properly using the existing laws. If that turns into hard evidence, would the Minister agree to meet so that we can see what progress we can make?
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend for raising this, and may I pay tribute, please, to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for whom this bill and helping victims of domestic abuse is a personal priority. I would be delighted to meet my right honourable friend, not least because we share the same ambulance service, and I would like them to be doing right by victims of domestic abuse as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has cut 21,000 police officers, which is the cause of violent crime doubling. Knife crime and antisocial behaviour has brought misery and terror into our communities. Isn't it time the Home Secretary got a grip on law and order and invested in our police service before he's fast becomes known as the Home Secretary for Crime and Disorder?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the honourable lady will know there's action required on many fronts to fight the rise in serious violence, and that's why we have our serious violence strategies with over 60 different measures taking place. But she will know when it comes to resources, if that's what she really believes in, the best thing to do is to support the government's police settlement.
Esther McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too welcome the government's domestic abuse bill and the announcements today, and wonder if the Minister could meet with me to discuss issues of continuing emotional abuse once a couple have divorced but share parenting of their children. Constituents of mine in that situation have got some very practical suggestions to reduce that emotional bullying.
Very much so. The bill is just part of our response to tackling domestic abuse. There's a range of non-legislative measures as well, and in making sure that we include emotional abuse in the definition of domestic abuse will help victims of this terrible crime. I'll be delighted to meet with her.
Amy Stone.
Mr. Speaker, in the remotest parts of the United Kingdom, EU health workers are filling vital roles that might otherwise remain unfilled. Will the government give me an assurance that these crucial people will be allowed to remain at no cost to themselves?
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that in the second private beta testing phase of the EU Settled Status Scheme, we made a particular priority of those working within NHS trusts and the university sector. He is absolutely right to point out the vital role that EU citizens play within our health service, and he will of course heard the Home Secretary and I repeatedly say we want them to stay and are determined to make it as easy as possible for them to do so.
Mr. Speaker, people in Corby and East Northamptonshire want to see more police out on the beat catching criminals and deterring crime. What difference does my right honourable friend believe the additional funding recently announced will have in achieving that objective?
What we're proposing is the biggest increase in police funding since 2010. Almost every single force in the country is now actively recruiting and delivering what the public want to see, which is more officers on the street, more investigators bearing down on crime.
Mr. Speaker, the national newspaper this morning reports of a female constituent who is detained and is due to be removed tomorrow, despite court papers being lodged at the Court of Session at the start of the month. Is this a hostile environment in action? And either way, will the Minister meet me urgently so we can secure the immediate release of this constituent?
I'm, of course, very happy to meet the honourable gentleman to discuss this case. He will be conscious that it's inappropriate for me to discuss it on the floor of the House, but I'll meet him privately immediately after.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the coming months, fruit farmers in my constituency plan to welcome thousands of migrant workers from the European Union. Could my honourable friend assure me that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, these workers will still be able to come to make sure that we can pick and pack our fruit?
Well, my honourable friend will be aware that in addition to the rights of EU citizens, which we have secured, we're also piloting a seasonal agricultural worker scheme for those in the soft fruit industry and the growing industries, which she has spoken to me about a number of times. But I'm absolutely happy to give the reassurance that that pilot is something that we wish to see successful, and will work with her growers to make sure that it is.
James Frith.
Speaker, Mrs Amodio and her husband came to live in Bury over 60 years ago. Mrs Amodio had to sign the Official Secrets Act when she worked at Bury Police Station. Now retired, she and her husband are told by this government to register, apply and pay for settlement status. She feels unwelcome and angry. Can the Minister confirm this policy, and what has she to say to them? Does she agree with me that we become lesser versions of ourselves as a country with such mean-spirited policy?
Mr. Speaker, this government has made it absolutely clear that we welcome all EU citizens that have made their homes here, that have contributed so much to our nation, and we want to have a scheme in place that shows that welcome, and we will reflect on what's being said and see how we can continue to improve the scheme.
Order. Statement. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the whole House will join me in condemning Saturday's car bomb attack in Londonderry and paying tribute to the bravery of the Northern Ireland Police and the local community who helped to ensure that everyone got to safety. This House stands together with the people of Northern Ireland in ensuring that we never go back to the violence and terror of the past. Mr. Speaker, turning to Brexit, following last week's vote, it is clear that the government's approach had to change, and it has. Having established the confidence of Parliament in this government, I've listened to colleagues across Parliament from different parties and with different views. Last week I met the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Westminster leaders of the DUP, SNP, Plaid Cymru and the Green Party, and backbench members from both sides of this House. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, also had a number of such meetings. The government has approached these meetings in a constructive spirit, without preconditions, and I'm pleased that everyone we met with took the same approach. I regret that the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, has not chosen to take part so far. I hope he will reflect on that decision. Given the importance of this issue, we should all be prepared to work together to find a way forward, and my ministerial colleagues and I will continue with further meetings this week. Let me set out the 6 key issues which have been at the centre of the talks to date. The first 2 relate to the process for moving forwards. First, there is widespread concern about the possibility of the UK leaving without a deal. And there are those on both sides of the House who want the government to rule this out. But we need to be honest with the British people about what that means. The right way to rule out no deal is for this House to approve a deal with the European Union. That is what this government is seeking to achieve. The only other guaranteed way to avoid a no-deal Brexit is to revoke Article 50, which would mean staying in the EU. There are others who think that what we need is more time, So they say we should extend Article 50 to give longer for Parliament to debate how we should leave and what a deal should look like. This is not ruling out no deal, but simply deferring the point of decision. And the EU are very unlikely simply to agree to extend Article 50 without a plan for how we are going to approve a deal. So when people say rule out no deal, the consequences of what they are actually saying are that if we in Parliament can't approve a deal, we should revoke Article 50. Mr. Speaker, I believe this would go against the referendum result. And I do not believe that is a course of action that we should take or which this House should support. Second, all the opposition parties that have engaged so far, and some backbenchers, have expressed their support for a second referendum. I've set out many times my deep concerns about returning to the British people for a second referendum. Our duty is to implement the decision of the first one. I fear a second referendum would set a difficult precedent that could have significant implications for how we handle referendums in this country. Not least strengthening the hand of those campaigning to break up our United Kingdom. It would require an extension of Article 50. It would require an extension of Article 50. We would very likely have to return a new set of MEPs to the European Parliament in May. And I also believe that there has not yet been enough recognition of the way that a second referendum could damage social cohesion by undermining faith in our democracy. Mr. Speaker, we do not know what the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, thinks about this because he has not engaged. But I know that our members who have already indicated that they wish to test the support of the House for this path. I do not believe there is a majority for a second referendum. And if I am right, then just as the government is having to think again about its approach going forwards, then so too do those members who believe this is the answer. The remaining issues raised in the discussions relate to the substance of the deal, and on these points I believe we can make progress. Members of this House, predominantly but not only on the government benches and the DUP, continue to express their concern on the issue of the Northern Ireland backstop. All of us agree that as we leave the European Union, we must fully respect the Belfast Agreement and not allow the creation of a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, nor indeed a border down the Irish Sea. And I want to be absolutely clear, in the light of media stories this morning, this government will not reopen the Belfast Agreement. I have never even considered doing so, and neither would I. With regard to the backstop, despite the changes we have previously agreed, there remain two core issues: the fear that we could be trapped in it permanently, and concerns over its potential impact on our union if Northern Ireland is treated differently from the rest of the UK. So I will be talking further this week to colleagues, including in the DUP, to consider how we might meet our obligations to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland in a way that can command the greatest possible support in the House. And I will then take the conclusions of those discussions back to the EU. From other parts of this House, concerns have also been raised over the political declaration. In particular, these have focused on a wish for further precision around the future relationship. The political declaration will provide the basis for developing our detailed negotiating mandate for the future, and this new phase of negotiations will be different in a number of ways. It will cover a far broader range of issues in greater depth, and so will require us to build a negotiating team that draws on the widest expertise available, from trade negotiators to security experts and specialists in data and financial services. And as we develop our mandate across each of these areas, I want to provide reassurance to the House. Given the breadth of the negotiations, we will seek input from a wide range of voices from outside government. That must include ensuring Parliament has a proper say and fuller involvement in these decisions. It is government's responsibility to negotiate, but it is also my responsibility to listen to the legitimate concerns of colleagues, both those who voted leave and who voted remain, in shaping our negotiating mandate for our future partnership with the EU. So the government will consult this House on its negotiating mandate to ensure that members have the chance to make their views known and that we harness the knowledge of all select committees across the full range of expertise needed for this next phase of negotiations, from security to trade. This will also strengthen the government's hand in the negotiations, giving the EU confidence about our position and avoiding leaving the bulk of parliamentary debate to a point when we're under huge time pressure to ratify. Now, I know that to date Parliament has not felt it has enough visibility of the government's position as it has been developed and negotiated. It has sought documents through humble addresses, but that mechanism cannot take into account the fact that some information, when made public, could weaken the UK's negotiating hand. So as the negotiations progress, we will also look to deliver confidential committee sessions that can ensure Parliament has the most up-to-date information whilst not undermining the negotiations. And we will regularly update the House, in particular before the 6 monthly review points with the EU foreseen in the agreement. While it will always be for Her Majesty's government to negotiate for the whole of the UK, we are also committed to giving the devolved administrations an enhanced role in the next phase, respecting their competence and vital interests in these negotiations. I hope to meet both First Ministers in the course of this week and will use the opportunity to discuss this further with them. And we will also look for further ways to engage elected representatives from Northern Ireland and regional representatives in England. And finally, we will reach out beyond this House and engage more deeply with businesses, civil society and trade unions. Fifth, honourable members from across the House have raised strong views that our exit from the EU should not lead to a reduction in our social and environmental standards, and in particular workers' rights. So I will ensure that we provide Parliament with a guarantee that not only will we not erode protection for workers' rights and the environment, but we will ensure this country leads the way. To that end, my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, indicated the government's support for the proposed amendment to the meaningful vote put down by the honourable member for Bassett-Law, including that Parliament should be able to consider any changes made by the EU in these areas in future. My right honourable friend and others will work with members across the House, businesses and trade unions to develop proposals that give effect to this amendment, including looking at legislation where necessary. Sixth, and crucially, a number of members have made powerful representations about the anxieties facing EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU who are waiting to have their status confirmed. We have already committed to ensuring that EU citizens in the UK will be able to stay and to continue to access in-country benefits and services on broadly the same terms as now in both a deal and a no-deal scenario. Indeed, the next phase of testing of the scheme for EU nationals to confirm their status has launched today. And having listened to concerns from members and organisations like the 3 Million Group, I can confirm today that when we roll out the scheme in full on the 30th of March, the government will waive the application fee so that there is no financial barrier. So there is no financial barrier for any EU nationals who wish to stay. And anyone who has or will apply during the pilot phase will have their fee reimbursed. And more details about how this will work will be made available in due course. Some EU member states have similarly guaranteed the rights of British nationals in a no-deal scenario, and we will step up our efforts to ensure that they all do so. Mr. Speaker, let me briefly set out the process for the days ahead. In addition to this statement, today I will lay a written ministerial statement as required under Section 13(4) and 5 of the EU Withdrawal Act, and table a motion in neutral terms on this statement as required by Section 13(6). This motion will be amendable and will be debated and voted on in this House on the 29th of January, and I will provide a further update to the House during that debate. To be clear, this is not a rerun of the vote to ratify the agreement we have reached with the European Union, but the fulfilment of the process following the House's decision to reject that motion. The process of engagement is ongoing. In the next few days, my ministerial colleagues and I will continue to meet with members on all sides of the House and with representatives of the trade unions, business groups, civil society and others as we try to find the broadest possible consensus on a way forward. Whilst I will disappoint those colleagues that hope to secure a second referendum, I do not believe that there is a majority in this House for such a path. And whilst I want to deliver a deal with the EU, I cannot support the only other way in which to take no deal off the table, which is to revoke Article 50. So my focus continues to be on what is needed to secure the support of this House in favour of a Brexit deal with the EU. And my sense so far is that the three key changes are needed. First, we will be more flexible, open and inclusive in the future in how we engage Parliament in our approach to negotiating our future partnership with the European Union. Second, we will embed the strongest possible protections on workers' rights and the environment. And third, we will work to identify how we can ensure that our commitment to no hard border in Northern Ireland and Ireland can be delivered in a way that commands the support of this House and the European Union. In doing so, we will honour the mandate of the British people and leave the European Union in a way which benefits every part of our United Kingdom and every citizen of our country. And I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement, and I join with her in condemning the car bomb attack we've seen in London during the weekend, and commend the emergency services and the local community for their response. Mr. Speaker, the huge achievement of the Good Friday Agreement in reducing violence in Northern Ireland must never be taken for granted. It was an historic step forward, but we cannot take it for granted. The government still appears not to have come to terms with the scale of the defeat in the House of Commons last week. The Prime Minister seems to be going through the motions of accepting the result, but in reality is in deep denial. The logic of that decisive defeat is that the Prime Minister must change her red lines because her current deal is undeliverable. So can she be clear and explicit with the House? Which of her red lines is she prepared to move on? The Prime Minister's invitation to talks have been exposed as a PR sham. Every opposition party politician came out of those meetings with the same response. Contrary to what the Prime Minister has just said, there was no flexibility, there were no negotiations, nothing has changed.
Order. The Prime Minister was heard, and when there was noise, I called for it to stop, and the same must apply to the Leader of the Opposition. No one in this chamber will shout the right honourable gentleman down. Don't even bother trying, you're wasting your breath. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I do welcome the commitment that the fee for EU citizens to apply for settled status will be waived. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was fond of saying that this is the best possible deal on the table. It is the only possible deal on the table. But our EU negotiating partners are clear, and I quote, "Unanimously, the European Council have always said that if the UK chooses to shift its red lines in the future to go beyond a simple free trade agreement, then the EU will be immediately ready to give a favourable response." The House voted to hold the referendum. It also voted to trigger Article 50. There is a clear majority of this House to support a deal in principle and to respect the referendum result. But it requires the Prime Minister to face reality and accept her deal has been comprehensively defeated. Instead, we now understand the Prime Minister is going back to Europe to seek concessions on the backstop. Can I ask the Prime Minister this? What is the difference between legal assurances and concessions? What makes her think that what she tried to renegotiate in December will succeed in January? Mr. Speaker, this really does feel a bit like Groundhog Day. So, the first thing she must do is recognise the clear majority in this House against leaving without a deal and rule out no deal and stop the colossal waste of public money planning for an outcome. Questions too must be asked of the Chancellor. He reassured businesses that no deal would be ruled out by the Commons, yet he is sanctioning £4.2 billion to be spent on an option he believes will be ruled out. The Foreign Secretary said last week it was very unrealistic to believe the House of Commons would not find a way to block no deal. Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister to meet first with her Chancellor and her Foreign Secretary and see if they can convince her to do what is in her power to rule out no deal. And if she will not do that now, will she confirm to the House that if an amendment passes that rules out no deal, she will implement that instruction? The Prime Minister agreed the backstop because of her pledge to the people of Northern Ireland to avoid a hard border. But no deal would mean a hard border in Ireland and break the Prime Minister's commitment. Is she seriously willing to accept a hard border? But today heralds the start of a democratic process where this House will debate amendments that will determine how we navigate Brexit. Of course, the government tried to block us ever getting to this stage. They wanted us to have no democratic scrutiny whatsoever. Labour set out, and I believe there may be a majority in the House for such a proposal, for a new comprehensive customs union with the EU that would include a say, a strong single market deal that delivers frictionless trade, and ensure no race to the bottom on workers' rights or indeed any other of the important regulations and protections we have. We will, as we've said consistently from the beginning, back amendments that seek to rule out the disaster of no deal. And, as we've said, will not rule out the option of a public vote. So, Mr. Speaker, no more phony talks. Parliament will debate and decide. And this time, Mr. Speaker, I hope and expect the government to listen to this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, he says no more phony talks. It would be nice just to have some talks with him on this issue. Because he makes lots of claims about what has been said in the talks that have been held so far, but actually he doesn't know, because he didn't turn up to those talks. And I come back to him, he makes a great deal about the issue of no deal. He said that there is a consensus. I think he said there was a view across this House that supported a deal in principle and wanted to deliver on Brexit. That's exactly what I want to sit down and talk to him about. Because what we need to see is what is it that will secure the support of this House to enable us to leave the European Union with a deal. And we are continuing to listen to groups across the House in order to find the way to secure that support. Now, he talks about ruling out no deal. As I said in my statement, there are only two ways that you can ensure that no deal does not happen. One is to revoke Article 50, to reverse the decision of the referendum and to stay in the European Union. That would be a betrayal of the referendum decision that was taking place in 2016. And the other way is to agree a deal with the European Union. And it is precisely about finding a way that we can secure the support of this House for a deal that I'm talking with members across the House about and want to talk with the right honourable gentleman about. So I hope, from what he said today, that he will reconsider his decision not to attend those talks. He asked me to, he complained about the amount of money that was being spent. He talked about £4.2 billion being spent and how that money should actually be spent in other ways. I see the Labour Party have put out a press release saying that money should be spent in other ways. What the right honourable gentleman might not have noticed is that actually that £4.2 billion is not all money that's being spent on no deal. If we stop spending that money, then we wouldn't be prepared for a deal either. So he needs to recognise that actually government has to spend money to ensure that we are in a position, whatever the outcome of the negotiations with the European Union, whether we leave with a deal or in a no-deal circumstance. So I say once again to the right honourable gentleman and across the House, for those who are concerned about no deal, that means we should be leaving with a deal. But what we need to find is the way that this House we can secure the support of this House for a deal. What has been clear from the discussions that we have had so far is the wide variety of views that are held around this House on this issue. But when it comes to it, we all need to be able to look our constituents in the eye and say that we did the right thing by them. That is leaving with a deal that we ensures we deliver on the referendum and protect their jobs. That is what the government is about, that is what we're working on, and that is what we will deliver.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, as a supporter of the withdrawal agreement last week, I welcome the Prime Minister's acceptance of the need for change in the light of the result, and also her reassurance that she will not compromise on a permanently open border in Northern Ireland, and that, therefore, any discussions she has with the hard right wing on the Irish backstop will not compromise the commitment to a permanently open border. But would she also consider reaching out to those Remainers here who are not yet convinced of her agreement by at least relaxing, if she can't do a U-turn, her normal rejection of a customs union, because I don't see those agreements with outside powers lining up to do trade agreements with us to compensate us for leaving Europe, and her resistance to regulatory alignment with Europe, which is not inconsistent with some tightening up, at least, of freedom of movement of labour. I do urge her to be flexible on every front, because there was a large majority against the proposal last week, and there are probably more numerous Remainers who voted against her than there are Brexiteers, and she needs to reach out to them.
I'd say to my right honourable and learned friend, he talks about some degree of regulatory alignment. He might not have noticed that last summer the government put forward a proposal which included a degree of regulatory alignment with a parliamentary lock on that regulatory alignment, which raised concerns among a number of members of this House, and which members of this House said that some said that they would not consider to be the proper way forward. I actually think that what we need to have in the future is a good trade relationship with the European Union. What we have in the political declaration is a recognition that that issue of regulatory alignment with standards that are followed by the European Union is in balance with the question of checks at the border, and there is a spectrum of where that balance results. I've argued for frictionless trade. There are those in the European Union who have not accepted the concept of frictionless trade, but who do accept the concept of reducing that frictions at the border to as far as possible. And my right honourable and learned friend also said that he didn't see the trade deals that might come from around the rest of the world. I might say to him, I had today I had lunch with the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and one of the topics we were discussing was precisely a future trade deal between the United Kingdom and New Zealand. And before members opposite start talking about the size of New Zealand, not just a trade deal with New Zealand, but actually membership of the United Kingdom in the CPTPP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance copy of her statement. All of us share with the Prime Minister an abhorrence and disgust at the bombing that took place in Derry over the weekend, and we're delighted at the efforts of the emergency services that made sure there was no loss of life. But, Mr. Speaker, in the light of that, it was disturbing to see media reports this morning, at least of the potential of the opening up of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, I welcome the comments from the Prime Minister this afternoon, but can she confirm that she will neither seek to amend or add to the Good Friday Agreement in any way? Many of us remember the dark days that Northern Ireland went through. This weekend's attack was a frightening reminder of the fragility of the peace in Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, on the subject of talks, the SNP entered willingly into talks with the Prime Minister last week, and we remain ready to engage in those talks on the basis that we can discuss pausing Article 50, taking no deal off the table, and discussing a people's vote. But when the Prime Minister talks about no preconditions, in the letters which have gone back and forward between the two of us, the Prime Minister insists that the United Kingdom must leave the European Union on the 29th of March. Mr. Speaker, that is not consistent with a desire to discuss a people's vote. All preconditions must be taken off the table if we are to engage in meaningful dialogue. The SNP know that the Prime Minister's strategy is now to run down the clock, and I would have to say there is no sign that she is interested in meaningful talks or meaningful change. Prime Minister, take no deal off the table. You tell me that you have no desire for no deal. The Foreign Secretary has no desire for no deal. The Chancellor has no desire for a no deal. The Leader of the Opposition has no desire for no deal. The SNP has no desire for no deal. Neither do the Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru or the Greens. So let's stop this charade, because if we were to have a people's vote, we would have to extend Article 50. To say that today the only option is to revoke it is not true, although in our case we would welcome that in any case. Mr. Speaker, on the basis of the result last week of a defeat of 230 votes, the Prime Minister has not come here with fundamental change. This government is a farce. It's an embarrassment and the leadership is shambolic. The Prime Minister now must step up. We must extend Article 50 and end this impasse by bringing forward a second EU referendum. Do it for all sorts of reasons, but do it for the EU citizens living in the UK and now facing a registration scheme. Now, I am grateful and I congratulate the Prime Minister that the fees have been waived for EU nationals, a campaign that's been led by the Scottish National Party and our government in Edinburgh. It is shameful that those here, many have been here for decades, are being forced to register to stay in their own home. That is the fundamentals of it. Mr. Speaker, not in our name, where is the humanity of this? Mr. Speaker, in Scotland we have another choice. We did not vote for Brexit. We will not be dragged out of Europe by a Tory government we did not vote for. We might not be able to save the UK, but we can save Scotland. We have an escape route from the chaos of Brexit, an independent Scotland. Scottish independence will result in our country being a destination in Europe, a country at the heart of Europe, while the rest of the UK turns inwards and isolated from its European neighbours. Mr. Speaker, we want no part of it.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he raised a number of issues there. He talked about the issue of the Belfast Agreement. As I said in my statement, this government will not reopen the Belfast Agreement. I've never considered doing that, and I would not do it. So we remain committed to the Belfast Agreement and to maintaining our commitments under the Belfast Agreement. He talked about the question of no deal. He talked about running down the clock. We're not running down the clock. I brought a deal that had been negotiated with the European Union to the House. The House has rejected that. The House has rejected that. But I say once again to the right honourable gentleman, as I did earlier to the Leader of the Opposition and to other members of this House, and it's very simple. You cannot wish away no deal. Either you stay in the European Union or you have a deal. Now, I believe that it is right for us to leave the European Union because that's what people voted for in the referendum in 2016. So if you don't want no deal, if somebody doesn't want no deal, they have to be willing to agree a deal. And the point about sitting down and talking with people across this House is to identify those issues on which it will be possible for us to secure support, to make changes such that we can secure the support around this House. I thank him for his comments about the announcement that we've made today in terms of the fees for the applications for Citizens' Right. I would commend my honourable friends and members for South Leicestershire, Bexhill and Battle, Chesham and Ayrshire. But also, this was an issue that was raised by other members across this House. And then finally, I will say to the right honourable gentleman, as I have said before and will continue to say, that for the Scottish National Party to stand up and say that the best economic future for Scotland is to be outside the United Kingdom, is to fly... well, I have to say to every one of those members who is cheering that thought, that is to fly in the face of economic reality, because the reality is...
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder whether the Prime Minister and indeed the Leader of the Opposition recognise that with just 2 months to go, the past week has shown that party politics and Westminster will not deliver a resolution on Brexit, because party politics is not the same as Brexit. Brexit is separate to party politics, and so that will not change, and this House will not find a route forward. And she talks about social cohesion. But surely the most divisive thing to do would be for members of this House to vote through her deal, knowing that our communities simply do not want it.
Yep.
And isn't it time for all of us to be honest that Parliament's run out of road?
Yep.
We've been debating for 2.5 years. We could debate for another 2.5 years, and we still wouldn't reach a resolution on Brexit. The only people who can do that now, surely, are the British people.
I say to my right honourable friend, and I recognise the passion with which she is campaigning on this particular issue, but she is assuming that it is not possible to reach an agreement which will secure the support of the House. The purpose of what we are doing at the moment, of talking with parties, of talking with backbenchers across this House, is to find those issues. I've indicated issues in my statement on which we can move and on which we can then find that support across the House. I believe it is right for us to continue to work for a deal, to leave the European Union on the 29th of March, to do so with a deal that has secured the support of this House.
Ed Miliband.
Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister, as a litmus test of her flexibility, if this House voted, for example, for membership of a customs union, would she implement that decision?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, the point about what we're doing in terms of this process is identifying those issues on which there is agreement across this House and that secure the support of the House, of dealing with that with the European Union, but also of being faithful to the referendum and the vote that was cast in the referendum. And I believe that everybody, when we look at this issue, should not only say, should we be leaving the European Union, but should recognise the reasons that lay behind the vote to leave the European Union and deliver on those.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, particularly the part where she said that the EU nationals would have their fee waived. I think the whole House should recognise that, and also her acceptance that there is to be no change to the Belfast Agreement, for that would have opened a can of worms, and I recognise that completely. But she's also made clear, as someone who did not support the agreement last week, that she will now go forward and seek further change, and I welcome that. But in doing that, I wonder whether she has given further thought that, given that although she remains absolutely, completely in overall charge, whether she would insert a senior politician in those day-to-day negotiations to ensure that the political ramifications of this are taken carefully into consideration.
Can I say to my right honourable friend? Can I say to my right honourable friend, these negotiations at this stage are for politicians. Indeed, I will continue to have a role in that. The Secretary of State will have a role in that as well as we go forward. But what we need to ascertain first is where we can ensure that we can secure the support of this House for a deal, and then take that forward to the European Union.
Vincent Cable.
Could I also welcome the fee waiver and also welcome the Prime Minister's willingness to engage in serious conversations, including about the merits and the practicalities of a people's vote. But can I ask a specific question? At the end of last week, the Secretary of State for Defence put 3,500 troops on Brexit standby. Could she clarify what their rules of engagement would be in the event that they faced angry and violent demonstrators? And would they be armed?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that it is, of course, right that the government is taking the necessary contingency arrangements for the situation. I think what he will find is what we're talking about is those troops perhaps being able to relieve others who are undertaking roles such as guarding of certain sites. That's what we're talking about.
Sir William Cash.
Mr. Speaker, on the vital issue of UK tax policy, will my right honourable friend also reconsider the provisions under which the United Kingdom will embrace EU state aid rules, with the European Commission actually supervising our Competition and Markets Authority, and which gives the Commission a veto over future tax incentives for investment developments such as free ports, airports, industrial and enterprise zones?
Say to my honourable friend that if he looks back on the discussions that have taken place in the European Union, he will see that it has often been the United Kingdom that has been promoting fair competition across the United Kingdom, including in relation to state aid rules. The question of those state aid rules and what will be included in any future trade agreement that we have with the European Union is, of course, a matter that will be looked at in detail in the next stage of negotiations.
Yvette Cooper.
The Prime Minister seems to be talking as if she lost by 30 votes, not 230 votes. She says now she wants to give Parliament a say on the political declaration and the future partnership, but to be honest, we've heard all of this before. If she's serious, why not give Parliament a say before we finish the Article 50 negotiations, not after? Why not put to Parliament some votes on her red lines, including a customs union? Otherwise, how can any of us believe a word she says?
As I've set out, the correct process, which is provided for under the legislation, is that there will be a neutral motion next week, which will be amendable. There will be members across this House who wish to put down motions which may reflect different views across the House in relation to different matters. We will, of course, continue to work. And when the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, said that we were denying any democratic involvement in the process of, well, he says from a sedentary position, yes, we were. Actually, no, there is still, even when we get the support of this House for a deal, there will still be the process of legislating to ensure that that deal is put in place and the role that this House will play in that legislation.
Boris Johnson.
Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on her decision to waive the registration fee for EU nationals? I think will be very welcome, and also on her determination now to go back to Brussels and fix the backstop, because I think that is the way forward. But can she confirm that in so doing she will now seek legally binding change to the text of that backstop and to the text of the withdrawal agreement itself?
Say to my right honourable friend, what we are doing is exploring with members across this House the nature of any movement on the backstop that would secure the support of this House. There are a number of options that have been raised with us by members across the House. We need to look at those and continue to talk with colleagues, both those who have raised it from the backbenches on this side of the House and those who have raised this issue with from the benches opposite, particularly, obviously, our confidence and supply partners. There are a number of options. We will look to see what is going to secure the support of the House.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join with the Prime Minister in her words about the despicable and reckless attack in Londonderry at the weekend, carried out by Republican terrorists, of course, who are responsible for the murders of prison officers David Black in 2012 and Adrian Ismay in March 2016. These people have nothing to offer anyone in Northern Ireland and are rejected right across the board. On Brexit, can I thank the Prime Minister for the meetings that we have had in recent days and the good engagement, and for her recognition that there are core issues that need to be sorted out as far as the withdrawal agreement is concerned, her willingness to try and reach a consensus, and the fact that she is going to go back to Brussels and ask for the necessary changes to be made. And can I take it from what the Prime Minister has said that she is really serious now in terms of getting a consensus that can get this through the House with the necessary legal changes to the withdrawal agreement?
Yes, I can give the right honourable gentleman the assurance that obviously what I want to do is to identify the way forward in relation to dealing with the issues that have been raised about the backstop. I referenced the two key issues on its potential permanency and the impact on the Union in my statement, and find the best way, the way that we can resolve those issues that will command support from this House.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I take this opportunity to warmly thank the Prime Minister for having listened to the concerns that I and other members have raised on the issue of EU nationals? And can I ask her, given the goodwill that she's shown on this issue,
can she please remind the EU of their promises to reciprocate and encourage the EU 27 to remove any fees that they charge to UK citizens in their member states?
I think my honourable friend has raised a very important point. While it's important for us to give that reassurance to EU citizens here, we must also remember the UK citizens living in the EU 27 member states, and we will be pressing them to give the reciprocal commitments to UK citizens living in those member states. There are a number of states that have already said that they committed to various ways that they will provide protection for rights in a no-deal situation. We will continue to press them all to reciprocate.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Speaker, last Wednesday the Prime Minister said to the House that she would reach out in order to try and find a way forward from the crisis that is facing our country. But I'm sorry to say that, having listened to her statement this afternoon, while her door may have been open, her mind has remained closed because she has rejected stopping us leaving the EU with no deal, even though she knows it would be disastrous. And she has rejected remaining in a customs union, even though she knows it is essential, an essential contribution to keeping an open border and maintaining friction-free trade. The Brexit Select Committee last Wednesday published a report identifying a number of alternative ways forward and recommended that they be put to the House in a series of indicative votes. Since the Prime Minister has twice this afternoon said, well, what is it that will secure the support of the House, will she now put those to the vote?
The right honourable gentleman knows that the government will be tabling a neutral motion next Tuesday. That is what is required under the legislation, and that will now be, that is an amendable motion. But the right honourable gentleman again referenced this issue of rejecting no deal. As I said earlier, if people don't want no deal, there are only two ways to go. And it's no good honourable members from a sedentary position chuntering or shouting about this issue. The sheer facts are that no deal will only be taken off the table by either revoking Article 50, which turns back the result of the referendum, the government will not do that, or by having a deal, and that's what we're trying to work out.
Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, today the Shadow International Trade Secretary visited my constituency and said to the BBC, I quote, "If there is a motion for a second referendum that is put before Parliament, our position and the party is that we would be supporting a public vote." Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and I'm sure many Brexiteers in the north of England, that a second referendum would be a sellout and cause a huge amount of harm to trust in politicians?
I do agree with my honourable friend, because I believe that the British, a lot of people voted for the first time, or for the first time in many years, in the referendum in 2016. And I think their faith in politicians would be shattered if we failed to deliver on that vote. We have a duty to deliver on that vote in the referendum.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister could reach out by relaxing her own self-imposed red lines, which would include thinking about other solutions, such as staying in a customs union, which would deal with the backstop situation. But she seems intent on only trying to get her dead deal through the House by playing chicken with her own Brexiteers and what she calls her confidence and supply partners. So will she, first of all, tell us that she really does want to reach out? And secondly, will she tell the House, if we do amend this motion next Tuesday, will she respect that decision and put it into effect?
Can I say to the honourable lady that, of course, as I've said, it is possible for people to move amendments to the motion next Tuesday. We wanted to sit down with all parties and with different groups across the House, because there are different opinions on these issues in parties across this House, and find out where it is that it will be possible to secure support for a deal, to take that forward, to ensure that we leave with a deal. But underpinning that, of course, is the importance of us delivering on the referendum. I believe it is a duty for this Parliament to deliver on the referendum, to deliver Brexit, and to deliver a Brexit with a deal.
John Redwood.
A majority of voters in the referendum voted to leave and did not vote to sign a new comprehensive treaty binding us back into features of the EU. But I think a big majority in the country would welcome a comprehensive free trade agreement and use of Article 24 of the GAP while we're negotiating it. So will my right honourable friend, when she goes back to Brussels, table such a comprehensive free trade agreement and see if that breaks the logjam?
I say to my right honourable friend that we have been looking at a free trade area, a free trade agreement with the European Union. I just want to ensure that that is as ambitious as possible, and that's what is set out in the political declaration.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The only thing we know for certain that people voted for in the referendum was to leave the EU. Any other speculation is simply that. So I repeat the question that my right honourable friend, the member for Doncaster North, put earlier. Amazingly, she didn't even mention the words customs union in her statement. But if this House voted to either remain in a customs union or to remain in EFTA or the EEA, all issues that were raised with her by her own MPs when she met them last week, will she adhere to that?
As I've said, obviously it will be for people to amend the motion that takes place next week to see whether there is. What I say to the, can I just say to the right honourable lady, she's making some assumptions about the views of people across this House, which actually have not been. Which have not been reflected by the discussions that we have had with members across this House.
Sir Hugo Swire.
My friend is absolutely right to reject ruling out a no deal. Can I also say, for those of us like myself who did not support the government's withdrawal agreement on the basis of the backstop, if she can return from Brussels with something which is legally enforceable on this one area, I believe that she will carry most of the House with her.
Well said. Thank my right honourable friend for his comment. It has been clear in the conversations that we have had that in the specifics of the withdrawal agreement it is the backstop that is the issue, and that is why we'll be working hard to find a resolution of it.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
The Prime Minister knows that farming is integral to Welsh heritage. It is the beating heart of our rural economy. But she must also understand this. When she humours the idea of a no-deal Brexit, she freezes the heart's blood of our communities. When I meet with Welsh farmers this week, on what grounds can I possibly assure them that Westminster defends their interests when the Prime Minister would evidently prefer no deal to a people's vote?
I say to the honourable lady that I've given my response to the issue of a people's vote second referendum previously. I was pleased to meet, after we had negotiated the deal with the European Union, I was pleased to meet with Welsh farmers, and they were supporting their deal. They believed that it would be a good deal for Welsh farmers.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Bearing in mind that the Leader of the Opposition has a reputation for meeting with almost any organisation in the world, my constituents found it very distasteful that he was not prepared to give up his time to meet the Prime Minister. Will my right honourable friend assure the House that actually there have been a number of occasions when the House has given her instructions? The House has given the government an instruction about holding a referendum. The House has given an instruction about the date that we leave the European Union, and the Prime Minister is doing her utmost to carry out those commands.
Can I thank my right honourable friend? I think there are a number of people who are surprised at the Leader of the Opposition's unwillingness to meet with me as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom when he has met with other groups who do not have the national interest of this country at heart, and I am absolutely working to deliver, as my right honourable friend says, on the instructions of this Parliament that we leave the European Union on the 29th of March.
Kate Hoey.
Speaker, can I welcome the Prime Minister ruling out a second referendum and ruling out revoking Article 50 and leaving a WTO, whether managed or not, deal on the table. But could I just say to her, this is a Remain Parliament. the majority of people, MPs in this Parliament, voted to remain. Would she not think that one of the ways that we could show we are honouring what the people said would be to speed up the numbers of statutory instruments that needs to be got through this Parliament, the numbers of legislation that needs to be get through, so that we can actually get out on March the 29th?
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Lady that we have been obviously laying statutory instruments. Getting statutory instruments through this House, of course, does require the usual channels to work together, and I'm sure that her front bench, her party front bench, will have heard the interest that she has in ensuring those statutory instruments are able to go through this House.
Dominic Raab.
Welcome the Prime Minister's statement and support her determination to return to Brussels to secure changes, particularly to the backstop. Given what she said in her statement, can I urge my right honourable friend to not just rule out revoking Article 50, but rule out extending it, because that would give businesses certainty and give the public some finality and some reassurance that we will leave at the end of March, as promised.
Can I hope give my right honourable friend the reassurance that what I'm working for is to find a deal that will secure the support of this House such that we can leave and will leave the European Union on the 29th of March.
We're streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is now clear that the Prime Minister is counting on the House of Commons to rule out her red lines because she lacks the political authority to do so. But will she also accept and understand that whether it's her dead deal, no deal, Norway or no Brexit, all of the options that lie ahead are substantially different to what people were promised during the referendum? Given that, does she not understand there is not just a practical desire for a new referendum to break the parliamentary deadlock, but a moral imperative to make sure that it's the people that agree this country's future for generations to come?
Honourable gentleman, I apologise that I didn't have an immediate recall of the fact, but I wish the honourable gentleman a happy birthday, and I observe, probably not for the first time or the last, that he seems to me to be a very youthful fellow. The Prime Minister.
I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, to echo the many happy returns, happy birthday to the honourable gentleman. But can I say to him that I think when people voted in the referendum, they voted to leave the European Union. They voted to ensure that free movement came to an end. I think there were those who voted to ensure that we had an independent trade policy, those who voted to ensure there was no control from the no remit of the European Court of Justice here in the United Kingdom, and those who were concerned about the money that was sent every year to the European Union. And it is delivering on those that I think it's important that this Parliament focuses on.
George Freeman.
Speaker, can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, in particular a commitment to waive the fee required to be paid by European citizens, and her commitment to reach out cross-party in pursuit of a Brexit deal. We have to honour that referendum. Would she agree with me that while the Leader of the Opposition's position on Brexit is crystal clear, he's for leave up north and remain down south, there are many backbench Labour colleagues who have very serious Brexit voting constituencies who are looking for a way to honour the referendum result with us? And would she support those talks in trying to find a moderate, sensible, orderly Brexit that can deliver for the majority of the British people?
Can I thank my honourable friend for pointing out the inconsistencies in the Leader of the Opposition's position on this particular issue. I am working to ensure that we can deliver, that we can find that way through that enables us to leave the European Union, to leave in a smooth and orderly way, to leave with a deal, and to leave with a deal that is good for people across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Frank Field.
The Prime Minister is spending time reaching out to the House of Commons. Might we have a chance to reach out to her? During her statement, she made a number of assertions about what the opinions were of this House, but none of us know what the opinions of this House are or is. Might, therefore, when I table amendment on indicative votes, might the Prime Minister make that government policy so that we can openly, and our constituents see how we are voting, not how we are privately lobbying, on what guidance we wish to give to the Prime Minister?
The right honourable gentleman says I made a number of assertions in my statement. I made a number of comments that were based on the discussions that we have had so far with people from across this House, and we will continue to have those discussions. And I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will As I've indicated earlier, there is a neutral motion that is amendable next week, but the comments I made on the views of people across the House were based on the discussions that we've had. There are further discussions to be had.
Heidi Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to start by thanking the Prime Minister for offering to waive the £65 fee for EU citizens. I have a significant number in my constituency in South Cambridge and the scientific and research communities who will be relieved. However, what they won't be relieved about, and neither will I, well, the fact that now almost a week has gone on since the vote that was so significantly lost in this place, and yet we have no further information today about what the government's position is. Surely we cannot go on for yet another week. That's wasting another 2 weeks in total without some direction. So many members in this House today have suggested customs union, people's vote, indicative votes. The Prime Minister must commit to honouring one of those next week.
To my honourable friend, I set out in the statement that I made the areas on which the issues that had come up during the discussions we've had with members across this House. We will continue to have those discussions, and we are addressing those issues that I identified in my statement.
Jo Swinson.
I cannot believe that in good conscience, knowing what the Prime Minister does about the devastating impact of no deal on our economy and on our security, that she is willing to let us leave the EU on that basis. Yet she seems wedded to her red lines and still against a people's vote, which would have majority support if she backed it. With 67 days to go, the country deserves better than a massive game of chicken in the Tory party. When will the Prime Minister recognise she needs to move?
To the Right Honourable Lady, that she talks about the issue of no deal. It is not good enough simply to say that somebody doesn't want no deal. You could only deliver not having no deal, as I've said, in two ways. Now, there may be members of the Liberal Democrat Party who have a different view from me on whether or not we should stay in the European Union. I believe we should honour the result of the referendum in 2016. But the only other way to ensure that we don't leave with no deal is to leave with a deal. It's pretty simple.
Priti Patel.
I welcome the Prime Minister's recognition of the difficulties that have been raised around the backstop. So when the Prime Minister goes to Brussels, is she prepared to reopen the text of the withdrawal agreement in order to actually address many of the concerns that she has heard from many members and right honourable members of the House with regards to the backstop?
My right honourable friend, what we are doing is talking to members across this House to identify the various ways in which it would be possible to address this issue of the backstop. A number of options have been raised with us, and we are looking at all those options that have been raised.
Chris Leslie.
When the Prime Minister says there are only two ways to rule out a no-deal scenario, why does she keep leaving out the option of a people's vote?
Exactly.
It's true that would involve extending, seeking to extend Article 50, but it would be for a very specific reason of the democratic consent of the British people, rather than seeking to extend Article 50 for no specific reason. So on this issue, both for her and for the Labour Party front bench, isn't this now a time for leadership and decision-making and not prevarication and delay?
The decision was made in 2016 by the British people that we should leave the European Union, and that's what we're delivering.
David Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the Irish government has warned of the likely adverse economic and social impact on the Republic of a no-deal Brexit, given the extent of that country's reliance upon the British economy. Since the Irish backstop is probably the greatest impediment to a negotiated Brexit, can my right honourable friend confirm that she maintains bilateral discussions with the Irish government with a view to ascertaining if at all possible we can put forward an agreed position to the European Union?
Good point. We do continue to talk to the Irish government about their position in relation to the backstop. The formal position, of course, is that this issue of customs across the border, dealing with the border, is an EU competence and therefore not an individual member state competence. But of course, the position that the Irish government takes will be an important element of any consideration that the EU gives to any proposals that we put forward, and we will continue to talk to them.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says that she wants to find a way forward, but without allowing Parliament to vote on different options, it's unclear how we can discover where consensus lies. Isn't the truth that any alternative to the Prime Minister's deal, whether it is a Norway-type model, a Canada-type model, a customs union, or indeed a people's vote, all of them require more time to negotiate or to go back to the country? The Prime Minister says extending Article 50 is just putting off the decision, but the truth is that by failing to build a consensus, the only way that we can leave without a deal, now her deal has been so roundly rejected by this House, is to extend Article 50. And even at this late stage, will the Prime Minister not now agree to do that?
As a honourable lady, that we are continuing to work to see what would secure the support of this House, what deal would secure the support of this House such that we can leave the European Union with a deal. But can I also say to the honourable lady that extending Article 50 is not just the sort of great hope that she has, that this somehow solves everything. It defers the decision point that needs to be taken. There are limitations to what will be possible. This is not a decision for the United Kingdom alone, and the EU would be highly unlikely to agree an extension to Article 50 unless they had the prospect that there was an agreement, that there was a deal that would be delivered. Talks to ensure that we can identify what deal can be delivered is what we're engaging in.
Owen Patterson.
Speaker, can I welcome my honourable friend's comments on Northern Ireland? She knows that if we were to follow the route proposed by the honourable member for Wokingham, and we did get to the point where we could trigger Article 24 of GATT, we could continue for up to 10 years on zero tariffs and zero quotas, and that would allay many of the fears of those members opposite who are very worried about high tariffs under so-called world trade terms.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that this question of the GATT 24 is perhaps not quite as simple as some may have understood it to be. I think it is his expectation that it is simply possible to leave with no deal and immediately go into that situation, I think does not actually reflect accurately the situation that the United Kingdom would find ourselves in. I continue to believe that leaving with a deal is the best way forward for us in this leaving the European Union. That's what we'll continue to work for.
Barry Sherman.
Is the Prime Minister aware that this is supposed to be Blue Monday, the most miserable day of the year in the United Kingdom? But on this day, can I offer her some warmth and cheer? Because last week's resounding vote, she showed her resilience and she has been listening to people and talking to people. Can I just urge her to carry that process on? It doesn't, in this Westminster Village, happen overnight. Will she persist? Because otherwise I think she will have misread the feeling of this House. We will be demanding a vote on customs union, we will be demanding a vote on lengthening the process, and we will be demanding a vote on the people's choice and people's vote. If she listens more, I think we can come to a conclusion in this House that's going to be good for all of the country and not a miserable one.
Can I give the right honourable gentleman the assurance that we do want to continue those discussions, continue those conversations, continue listening in order to find what I think he, at the end of his question, he was indicating, which is a way forward that can be supported by this House and that will be good for everybody across the country.
Anna Seabury.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, but this just isn't good enough. This whole process is now turning our country into a laughingstock. The people of this country are worried, and businesses have none of the certainty that they absolutely need in order to flourish. The Prime Minister, when she faced the possibility in December of losing the vote, delayed the vote and said she was going to go over to the EU and sort out the backstop. So we waited and nothing happened, nothing changed. Last week it was a historic defeat. Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, this House has spoken. It has rejected overwhelmingly the Prime Minister's deal. And here we are with another week of can kicking. And the truth is, Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the truth is, isn't it, nothing's changed.
Say to my right honourable friend, I mean, first of all, we did received some further assurances from the European Union following the delay of the vote in December. Those assurances proved not to be sufficient for this House. This House rejected the deal, including those assurances. What we are now doing is working with people across this House to find the way forward that will secure a deal so that we can leave the European Union, do it in a smooth and orderly way, and leave with a deal which is in the interests of people across this country.
Sammy Wilson.
Can I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has rejected the demands from the leader of the Labour Party to raise the white flag in these negotiations by moving the date of the 29th of March for his leaving the EU? Is she disappointed that even before she has put forward any plan B, that the Irish Government and the Irish Vice President of the European Parliament have rejected any suggestion that the backstop will be changed? And does she therefore accept that in the face of such intransigence, the ability to leave on the 29th of March, as the people of the United Kingdom have asked for, is adhered to?
I believe it is important that we do deliver on the vote that took place in the referendum in 2016. We will continue to talk to the Irish Government because I believe that the best way forward for all of us is to be able to leave with a deal. We recognise the commitments that we've made to the people of Northern Ireland for no hard border, and I would hope that we will be able to find a way through that can secure the support of this House and the European Union such that we're able to leave with a good deal.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Can I thank the Prime Minister, my right honourable friend, for her statement and for her willingness to engage with those who are willing to engage with her. Can I congratulate her on the vote last week that she won, namely the vote of confidence, on the basis that she would not engage in preparations for a second referendum, on the basis that either we negotiate a successful deal which the House of Commons votes for, or we leave on WTO terms? And will she take the advice of JP Morgan, who stood side by side in the referendum for Remain, but are now warning that the extension of Article 50 would, and I quote, be the worst of all possible worlds, death by 1,000 cuts for the British economy? Will she make sure that we avoid that extension?
I say to my right honourable friend, I had not seen that comment from JP Morgan, but as I've been clear that I believe it's important that we deliver on the vote of the referendum, leaving the European Union, and that is on the 29th of March.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us before that a public vote could, and I quote, damage social cohesion by undermining faith in our democracy. Can I tell her it's because of the way she and her government have thus far handled this process over the last 2 years that the public already believe that our politics is broken? Will the Prime Minister today acknowledge that there can be nothing more democratic than the vote that gives the entire country a final say on her deal?
Say to the honourable lady that I think that there are many, many people up and down this country who have a very simple view, that there was a vote that took place in 2016. The result of that was to leave the European Union. And there are many people now, not only those who voted to leave at that time, but many of those who voted to remain at that time, that feel it is now incumbent on government and Parliament to deliver on the result of that vote.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reports from Warsaw suggest that the Polish Foreign Secretary, Mr. Czaputowicz, is taking the lead in trying to help the United Kingdom to break the impasse by suggesting a definitive time for the backstop. Could the Prime Minister share with us some of the helpful things the Polish government is doing to help us and encourage others to follow suit?
I say, I look forward to exploring in more detail the proposals that have been put forward by the Polish Foreign Minister on this particular issue of dealing with the backstop. We have always worked well with the Polish government on these and other matters across the European Union Council, and want to continue to have that very close relationship with Poland after we leave the European Union.
Ben Bradshaw.
On the Union, Mr. Speaker, could I suggest that seeking public consent for a Brexit that looks very different from the one sold to the public in 2016 would do far less damage than tearing Scotland and Northern Ireland out of the Union in a botched Brexit against their will? So can I ask her, is her first loyalty to her party or the country?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that every decision I've been taking because I believe it is right in the national interest. I genuinely believe that we should be, as a government and as a parliament, delivering on the result of the referendum in 2016. I think that is our duty. It's very simple.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 12 days ago, the Member of Parliament for North Down warned of, in her view, that if there was a no-deal Brexit, this could be used by people wanting to agitate towards a border poll and trying to force Northern Irish people to vote to leave the UK. Does the Prime Minister agree that this is a risk, and could she confirm that no deal is not her top priority, indeed is not the priority of the government?
The position of the government is very clear. We want to leave the European Union with a deal. We want to leave with a good deal. The deal that we had negotiated has been rejected. That's why we are now asking the question across the House and talking to people and listening to people about what it is that would secure the support of this House for a deal that will enable us to leave with a good deal on the 29th of March.
The Prime Minister ruled out a second referendum on the grounds that such an action would undermine social cohesion in this country. Doesn't she accept that that displays an incredibly jaundiced view about the character of the British people?
No, it does not. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that if he looks at the decision that was taken in 2016, there were many people who, 17.4 million people voted for us to leave the European Union. It was the highest turnout in a poll that we'd seen for some considerable time. There were many people who voted for the first time for many years, if not for the first time at all, in that referendum. And I think if we were to go back and say that we were not delivering on the result of that referendum, that would indeed damage people's faith in politics. I think it would damage our democracy.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
As today is Blue Monday, the gloomiest day of the year, will the Prime Minister cheer up at least 17.4 million people, and probably many more, by confirming that beyond a shadow of a doubt this country will have left the European Union by the 30th of March?
My honourable friend has regularly asked me this question, and my answer has not changed. First of all, I believe it is our duty to deliver leaving the European Union, and as he will know, there is a date in legislation for us to leave. It is the 29th of March. That's the end of the two-year Article 50 process.
Dame Louise Ellman.
Here. Last week, the Prime Minister suffered a major defeat. Today, she hasn't come to the House with any answers, but she claims she wants to have extensive discussions on a variety of issues, both inside and outside this House. Yet meaningful discussions need time. So why is she refusing to call for an extension of Article 50?
That's right.
Here. There were two elements in relation to my statement on this question of discussions and discussions outside the House. Of course, there are discussions we're holding in relation to the finding a deal that will secure the support of the House, and then there are also, as I referred to in my statement, discussions that in the next stage of negotiations we will be having not just within the House but outside the House as well. I believe it is important for us to work to find a deal that will enable us to leave on the 29th of March.
Helen Grant.
Does the Prime Minister agree that members of this House should be mindful of the fact that most of us were elected on manifestos that promised to honour the referendum?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. In one sense, it's a very simple point, but it is very important, which is that 80% of the votes at the general election last year were for parties which had in their manifesto that they would respect the referendum and deliver on the referendum and ensure that we leave the European Union, and that's what the government is doing.
Emma Reynolds.
Speaker, the words customs union weren't on the ballot paper in the EU referendum. Can the Prime Minister name a UK manufacturer who has said that the benefits of free trade agreements around the world, even if they were agreed quickly, would outweigh the costs of leaving the European Customs Union?
Can I say that position that I believe will be of great benefit for manufacturers and for our economy in the future is for us to have a good trading relationship with the European Union and the freedom to negotiate those trade deals around the rest of the world, and that's what we've been working for.
Sir Desmond Swain.
How is remaining in a customs union consistent with the decision of the British people to be no longer subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court?
My right honourable friend raises an important issue. I believe when one of the reasons why people voted to leave the European Union was to leave the remit of the European Court, the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and that's what we want to deliver.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said that EU citizens in the UK will be able to stay and to continue to access in-country benefits and services in broadly the same terms as now. But is she aware that my constituents and many constituents of my honourable colleagues have actually been finding it difficult to access universal credit on the basis that they have not been staying here long enough? Will the Prime Minister look into this? Because it seems that EU citizens are already being denied their rights. It's a new hostile environment for EU nationals.
We've been very clear in the scheme that the Home Office has set out in relation to the rights that EU citizens would have. The withdrawal agreement, which I think the Honourable Lady voted against, actually sets out clearly the rights for EU citizens on us leaving the European Union. But I will, of course, ensure that the relevant department look at the issue she's raised.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Prime Minister for saying that she will go back to the European Union to discuss the issue of the backstop particularly. When she goes, will she take with her a copy of the House of Lords report from March 2017 that says if we leave without a deal, we don't owe them any money, because that may make them more willing to talk?
Well, my honourable friend, can I say to my honourable friend that the issue of the House of Lords report was responded to by my right honourable and learned friend, the Attorney General, in the debate last week, where he was very clear that actually what the House of Lords report had looked at a particular aspect of law, but that they had themselves recognised that there may be obligations under other aspects of international law. And the advice is clearly that there would be obligations for us to pay in a no-deal situation, and I believe that we should be a country that does respect its legal obligations.
Chukaramuna.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened carefully to what the Prime Minister has said about social cohesion and division in our country. All of us worry about the far right and the threat they pose to our country. And history shows that a resurgence of the far right usually follows an economic depression, which is why avoiding no deal at all costs is essential. But does she not agree in any event that it would be wholly wrong to allow any group in society to threaten and intimidate us into not following our democratic processes and into not having votes? That is clearly unacceptable, and anyone engaging in that kind of threat, violence, intimidation should feel the strong arm of the law come down on them.
I say to the honourable gentleman that I believe it is important, and there's an important issue about some of the behaviour that we've seen, which members of this House have been the victims of. But others have been on the receiving end of aggressive behaviour as well, because they appear to hold a different view from those held by other people. It's important that we're able to have our debates, not just in this House, but in public, on these issues, with dignity, with respect, with people, yes, wanting to put their positions passionately, but respecting the right of others to hold a different view, and to hold that view equally passionately. But I also believe that it's important, when this House has given a decision to the British people in a referendum, that we deliver on that.
John Whittingdale.
I thank my right honourable friend for listening to concerns felt by a number of us on these benches, and for her recognition that there must be changes to the backstop. But can she also confirm that those aspects of our future relationship set out in the political declaration, which also cause some concern, that those are not legally binding and can be addressed and changed in the course of the subsequent negotiation?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that the political declaration does set out the framework for the negotiations in the future, but there obviously are elements with it, but that has to be negotiated into legal text, and as he will, I'm sure, be aware, there are elements within that text which have not identified absolutely a particular position. I referred earlier in response to a question from an honourable friend about this balance between checks at borders and alignment and regulatory alignment, and obviously that is a matter that is for the future negotiations.
Pat McFadden.
The Prime Minister has set out today and many times in recent weeks her implacable opposition to any kind of public vote to establish public consent for the terms on which we leave the European Union through a referendum. Is she as implacably opposed to a general election?
I have also said if the right honourable gentleman had heard the speech that I gave last week in the no confidence debate, he will have seen that I made it absolutely clear that I do not believe that a general election is in the national interest at this time.
Greg Hands.
Returning to issues around the World Trade Organization, one of the things that will need to be sorted out in the question of a no-deal Brexit will be what happens with some of the most favoured nation clauses. Now, if she were to put up no tariffs, barriers or checks to EU goods at all after the 29th of March, which would be very helpful in ensuring no change and free-flowing trade from our side, of course, that might provoke MFN challenges at the WTO. So what assessment has the government made of the relative merit in such a scenario of carrying on with trade as it currently is, vis-à-vis the risk of WTO challenges, which of course wouldn't be heard for 18 months, and any infraction would not be able to be retrospective? And does she agree with me that it may well be worthwhile, so long as the study is done, of actually pursuing that course of simply keeping the border open in the event of a no-deal Brexit?
I know that my right honourable friend, obviously from his previous position and ministerial position and his interests, has looked at this issue with great care. But of course, as we look at this issue, it isn't simply a question of the tariffs that we set for for items going across our border. There are the questions of the WTO requirements in relation to customs declarations at the border, and there are other issues which are referred to within the political declaration, such as issues relating to data, which are also relevant in this matter.
This is Helen Goodman.
If the House votes to take time to consider options other than those which the Prime Minister has been presenting to us, will she accept that this is not an attack but a sign of the strength of our parliamentary democracy?
Say to the right honourable lady that if she is referring to the issue of an extension of Article 50, she shakes her head, but well, but the only way in which it is possible to ensure that there is more time in the negotiations with the European Union to find that resolution would be if Article 50 were extended. Article 50, as I've indicated, cannot be extended but simply by the decision of this House alone. It is a matter that is has to be agreed by the European Union as well, and I think that it is very clear that they would not be likely to allow that extension unless it was clear that there was a deal or an agreement that was coming forward as a result of that. I think it's far preferable for us, and I think as I've said, I believe we should be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March, and the discussions that I and others have been holding with members across this House are aimed at exactly being able to do that, and do that with a deal that secures the support of this House.
Maria Miller.
I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and the extraordinary work that she's doing to shape our exit from the EU. And actually, Mr Speaker, can I just say, in response to the right honourable member from Exeter, who questioned the Prime Minister's commitment to our country, that there is nobody on this side of the House who would do that, and very few people outside as well. But can I also press her that if the leader of the Labour Party continues to work collaboratively with the government, that this action effectively makes no deal the more likely outcome in March. And shouldn't he just come clean and admit that?
Say to my right honourable friend, she's absolutely right. As I said, that the only way in which it is possible, other than staying in the EU, which we will not do, the only way in which it is possible to ensure that there is no deal is off the table is to agree a deal. The offer that I gave, and it remains open to the Leader of the Opposition to entertain, engage in talks with us, was precisely talks about ensuring we can have a deal so that we do not leave with no deal.
David Linden.
Mr. Speaker, you've been forgiven for watching these proceedings and thinking that the Northern Irish backstop is the only issue that prohibits people from supporting the agreement. But last week when I visited Glasgow Kelvin College, which is a campus in Easterhouse, they expressed major concern about the Erasmus scheme and a lack of clarity for them. So, not referring to universities, what reassurance can she give to colleges in this country about the future after Brexit?
Say to the honourable gentleman that if he looks at the political declaration, we have obviously referenced those aspects of being continue to able to work with collaboratively across with the European Union, with colleges and universities across the European Union through issues like Horizon, and also looking at the possibility of extension of Erasmus. Those are referenced in the political declaration, but they cannot be part of a legally agreed text until after we've left the European Union.
Richard Graham.
Firstly, I warmly welcome the announcement by the Prime Minister that reassures over 3 million European nationals in the United Kingdom about having their fees for registration rights waived. And although the European Commission's line on not being able to determine Member States' views on this is well known, the European Parliament's Brexit coordinator has stressed that reciprocity for British citizens in the European Union is essential. So would my right honourable friend ensure the government holds them to that pledge? And secondly, I don't understand what all the discussion about customs union today is about, because the customs union and the relationship on the trade and investment side comes at the second stage. What we're trying to get over the line is the withdrawal.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. First of all, the European Parliament were very clear that citizens' rights was their key concern in this withdrawal agreement. And we have discussed those with them, and I will continue to press both them to press Member States, but also press Member States individually to reciprocate on this issue of citizens' rights. But my honourable friend is absolutely right. There are two parts to the deal that was negotiated: the withdrawal agreement, which is the legal text about how we withdraw from the European Union, and the political declaration of our future relationship. And setting that into legal text is indeed a matter for the next stage of negotiations.
Mr. Peter Carr.
And turning now to the United States, the federal government has been partially closed now for 31 days, longer than any previous shutdown.